You keep replaying the exact moment the warmth vanished. Not a fight, not a betrayal, just a quiet shift. A pause that lasted too long, a look that suddenly turned inward, and then the distance. You told yourself it was temporary. You told yourself you just needed to give them space, to be patient, to love them through the fog. But space became a canyon. Patience became exhaustion, and love became a one-way current pulling you under while they stood safely on the shore. You still wake up reaching for a phone that hasn't rung. You still draft messages in your head that you know you'll never send. You still wonder what you did wrong, what you could have said differently, what part of you was too much or not enough. The silence after an avoidant pulls away isn't empty. It's heavy. It presses against your ribs. It asks questions you don't have the strength to answer. And in that quiet, you start bargaining with reality. You start believing that if you just try harder, if you just become softer, quieter, more accommodating, they'll return to the version of them that once looked at you like you were the only room in a burning building. Here is the truth you've been avoiding. Your pursuit is not saving them. It is training them to leave. Every text you send into the void, every gentle check-in, every carefully worded attempt to bridge the gap registers in their nervous system as pressure. Not because they don't care, but because their brain was wired to read closeness as a threat long before they ever met you. You are trying to speak the language of secure attachment to someone whose nervous system only understands survival. You are offering a hand while they are bracing for impact. The harder you reach, the faster they retreat. The more you explain, the more they dissociate. You think you are proving your loyalty. They experience it as suffocation. And until you stop mistaking their withdrawal for rejection, you will keep chasing a ghost while your own worth bleeds out in the waiting room. Understand what is happening beneath their silence. When intimacy deepens, the avoidant amygdala doesn't register safety. It registers entrapment. Their nervous system, conditioned by early environments where closeness meant unpredictability, where love came with conditions or sudden disappearances, treats emotional proximity like a physical constraint. Cortisol floods, heart rate climbs, breath shallow. The body goes into low-grade panic, but the mind masks it with calm detachment. They don't feel cold. They feel flooded. So they retreat to regulate, not out of cruelty, out of self-preservation. Dopamine, the chemical of reward and pursuit, drops when connection feels demanding. Their brain stops associating you with pleasure and starts associating you with performance, with expectation, with the exhausting work of being needed. They pull away not to punish you, but to breathe, to lower the alarm bells ringing in their skull, to convince themselves they are still in control of their own emotional oxygen. This is where your pain makes sense. You loved them. You showed up. You stayed when it got hard, and still they folded inward. But they didn't stop caring. They short-circuited. The affection was real. The moments of tenderness were not illusions. They were simply operating on a nervous system that cannot sustain sustained vulnerability without triggering collapse. When the weight of your need, however gentle, met their fragility, something inside them shut down. They didn't choose indifference. They chose anesthesia. They numbed themselves to the very connection they wanted because wanting you felt like losing themselves. They feared drowning in your love more than they feared losing it. That is not a reflection of your value. It is a reflection of their capacity. And capacity can be expanded, but only when it is not being demanded to stretch while it is still healing. There is only one thing that shifts this dynamic, one lever that changes everything. Non-reactivity. Not as a game, not as a tactic, but as a sovereign boundary. When you stop chasing, when you stop explaining, when you stop bending yourself into shapes that fit their avoidance, you do something revolutionary. You remove the pressure that keeps their nervous system locked in defense. You step out of the cycle. And in that stillness, they are finally left alone with the consequences of their own retreat. Silence is not punishment. It is a mirror. It reflects what their distance has actually cost them. When you are no longer available to soothe their guilt, to validate their confusion, to absorb their hot and cold rhythm, the illusion of control shatters. They thought distance would bring relief. They didn't realize it would bring absence. And absence, when it finally settles in, is heavier than any confrontation. Watch what happens in the quiet weeks. At first, they breathe easier. The weight lifts. They tell themselves they needed this. They convince themselves it was the right choice. They scroll through life with a quiet sense of triumph. They feel free. But freedom without foundation quickly turns to vacuum. By the third week, the novelty of space wears thin. The quiet stops feeling peaceful and starts feeling hollow. They notice the missing pieces, the inside jokes that no longer land, the way your presence used to ground them without asking for anything in return. They start checking your name, not to reach out, just to see if you're still moving, if you're still breathing without them. They see you living, not performing, not waiting, just existing. And that triggers something they didn't anticipate. Regret. Not dramatic, not theatrical. A slow, creeping ache. The kind that visits at 2 a.m. when the distractions fade and the nervous system finally stops lying to them. They remember how you looked at them, how you held space for their contradictions, how you never demanded they be someone they weren't. And suddenly, the distance they engineered starts feeling like a cage. The dopamine they chased from autonomy now turns against them. Their brain, deprived of the subtle reward your presence once provided, starts craving it. They draft messages they delete. They rehearse conversations in the shower. They tell friends they're fine, but their eyes give them away. They start noticing the patterns, the way they always retreat when things get real, the way they confuse peace with emptiness, the way they mistake your patience for permission to keep leaving. They don't reach out immediately. Avoidants don't rush. They orbit. They test the gravity. A like, a vague story, a mutual friend's comment, a late-night text that says nothing and everything. They are measuring your response, waiting to see if you'll collapse back into the old rhythm, if you'll soften, if you'll prove that no matter how far they push, you'll still be there to catch them. That is the moment everything changes. Not when they miss you, but when you stop needing them to. Do not break your stillness now. This is the warning most never survive. The second they circle back, your nervous system will scream for resolution. You will want to fix it, to talk it out, to finally be seen, to finally be chosen. But if you drop your boundaries the moment they show a flicker of interest, you teach them a devastating lesson. That retreat always brings you closer. That distance is a tool, that your love is a safety net they can fall into whenever the world gets too heavy. The pattern will reset. You will be back in the same loop, only deeper, only more exhausted. Non-reactivity is not about making them chase. It is about refusing to play a game that costs you your dignity. Hold your ground. Let their orbit do the work. Let them sit in the quiet they created. Let them feel the weight of what they walked away from. You are not a rehabilitation center for fractured attachment. You are not a training ground for someone learning how to stay. You are a whole ecosystem. And whole ecosystems do not shrink to fit broken containers. If they do reach out with clarity, with accountability, with a willingness to sit in the discomfort they caused, that is different. But clarity does not come in fragments. It does not arrive as half sentences wrapped in nostalgia. It arrives as presence, as consistency, as a nervous system that has finally learned it is safe to stay. Do not confuse longing with change. Do not mistake nostalgia for growth. They can miss you deeply and still be incapable of holding you securely. Grief is not a blueprint for transformation. You must demand evidence, not echoes. You must require action, not atmosphere. And until they can offer that, you keep walking. Not in anger, not in revenge, in alignment, in quiet, unshakable sovereignty. This is where you stop asking what they think. This is where you start remembering who you are. You were never the problem. You were the mirror. You showed them what secure love looks like, what patience feels like, what it means to be held without conditions. That reflection was uncomfortable because it highlighted everything they haven't healed. But that discomfort is not your burden to carry. Your job was never to fix their nervous system. Your job was to honor your own. And honoring your own means refusing to abandon yourself for the sake of someone who keeps choosing flight over foundation. You do not need to be chosen by someone who doesn't know how to choose themselves. You do not need validation from a heart that confuses closeness with captivity. You are not a placeholder in someone else's healing journey. You are the destination. Feel the shift in your chest, the lightness that comes when you stop negotiating your worth, the quiet power of knowing you can walk away without begging, without bargaining, without breaking. You are allowed to outgrow the version of love that leaves you guessing. You are allowed to demand consistency without apology. You are allowed to take up space without shrinking. The avoidant who walked away will spend years learning what you already know. That love is not a threat. That closeness is not consumption. That staying is not surrender. But you do not have to wait for them to catch up. You get to move forward. You get to build a life where your presence is met with presence, where your vulnerability is met with safety, where your love is not a test someone keeps failing, but a home someone is ready to keep. Let the silence do its work. Let it strip away the illusion that you need their return to feel complete. Let it teach you that your value was never tied to their capacity to stay. You are not waiting. You are becoming. And in that becoming, you reclaim every piece of yourself you handed over to someone who didn't know how to hold it. You step into your own gravity. You stop orbiting their hesitation. You become the center. And when you finally stand in that truth, you will realize something profound. They didn't lose you. You found yourself. And that is the only return that ever truly matters.